Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's DoD Environmental Planning and Conservation webinar series presentation. As a reminder, today's presentation will be recorded and then posted on the Cultural Resources DenX website under News and Outreach after security review. Today's presenters are Taylor Schad. She is a policy advisor for the U.S. Department of Agriculture Office of Tribal Relations, and Juliana Nykolaiszyn. She is a department head and professor for digital resources and discovery services at Oklahoma State University Library. They will be discussing OSU Tribal Treaties Database demonstration. Following the presentation, we will have time for questions. Before we get started, please take a moment to make sure your phones or web browsers are on mute. Before I turn it over to Taylor and Juliana, Ms. Kate Plimpton would like to say a few words. Kate?
Really excited about the EP&C webinar today that's focusing on the Native American Affairs Tribal Treaties Database program. As Jerry mentioned, my name is Kate Plimpton and I serve as the Cultural Resource Management Lead for the OSD. It's my hope today that the webinar on the database will help you guys appreciate the tool, this vital tool that's available to help DoDs address its responsibilities and the rights that tribes may assert during consultations with military installations. The Tribal Treaties Database was developed through a partnership with the Department of Interior, the Department of Agriculture, and Oklahoma State University. And DoD, under the Legacy Resource Management Program, was able to provide financial support for the creation of the interface of the database, enabling the digitization and indexing of Charles Kapler's Indian Affairs laws and treaties. This publicly available database will now allow federal employees, tribes, and the public to search through American Indian treaties and utilize them in their work. Accessing digitized treaties via the database will assist DoD components in identifying at the outset of project planning whether proposed actions or ongoing activities within installations and training ranges might impact protected tribal treaty rights, reserved rights, land rights, or resources. We're very excited and pleased to welcome our webinar presenters, who are the experts who played central roles in designing and building this database. So I will turn it over to Ms. Taylor Schad and Ms. Juliana Nykolaiszyn, and thank you guys so much for being here. Over.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. So Ampetu Washday, my name is Taylor Schad. I am a citizen of the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe in South Dakota, and I'm based in DC as a policy advisor for the Office of Tribal Relations in the Secretary's Office at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I mostly focus on the Forest Service and Natural Resources portfolio, as well as I am the OTR team lead for the treaty database work. And I'll hand it over to Juliana to introduce herself.
Thank you, Taylor. My name is Dr. Juliana Nykolaiszyn. My job title changed within the last couple of weeks. I'm the new Associate Dean for Library Operations at Oklahoma State University. It's our pleasure to be involved with this work and bringing you the Tribal Treaties Database, which you could find online at treaties.okstate.edu.
So as we said, we were really excited to join you all today. So we did want to provide a little bit of an overview of our presentation. So I will provide a little bit of framing on the creation of the database and the progress we have made so far in the different phases. I will then hand it over to Juliana, who will talk about the most recent information being added to the site and pull up the database and walk through the different resources available on the website. And then we will end this presentation discussing some of the feedback we have heard, potential additions and next steps, and then open it up to you all for some questions. So with that, we'll get started on a little bit of the background and the creation of the database. So at the 2021 Tribal Nation Summit, President Biden personally announced 5 new initiatives, including the Tribal Treaty Rights MOU, which was signed by 17 departments and agencies that set out to protect treaty rights and the work of the federal government. In the 2021 Treaty Rights MOU builds upon the 2016 Treaty Rights MOU, including a list of actions the signatory departments intended to carry out in alignment of the goals of the MOU. One of these actions was for the parties to support the creation, integration, and use of a searchable and indexed database of all treaties between the United States government and tribal nations. The current version of the database was funded in collaboration between the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Department of the Interior, and the Department of Defense Legacy Resource Management Program. The departments partnered with Oklahoma State University libraries to create and update the database. The biggest value add of the database is that it will assist, and it has assisted, federal agencies and help facilitate compliance with implementing treaty rights, obligations, and different treaty work. It is still in the beta version, but the goal is for it to be publicly available, word searchable, and fully indexed. And then as we continue our work on the database, we provide regular updates and receive feedback from the White House Council on Native American Affairs Tribal Treaty Rights Interagency Work Group that was created in response to the Treaty Rights MOU. So a little bit of the database's progress so far. So we have been approaching this work in phases. With the first phase of the database included the creation of the interface for the database by digitizing and indexing Charles Kapler's Indian Affairs Laws and Treaties, Volume 2. Within this phase, we focused on 3 different components: technical requirements, so creating a user-friendly, easy to navigate, easy to search, open source content management system, the different feature requirements and the stylistic components, the ability to copy and paste from the database, enhanced indexing, and a robust search functionality. And then lastly, the content requests. So volume 2, text and margin notes, original signatory tribes, and then the modern day tribes, keywords, and then links to the treaty scans. And then we moved into phase 2, and this focused more on those connections to signatory and modern day tribes. So we hired a scholar in residence, or OSU hired a scholar in residence to carry out an in-depth research on enhanced indexing of common tagged provisions, things like hunting and fishing, rights of way, bad man clauses, these types of provisions that are found throughout treaties, and then we've tagged them within the different treaties on the database, and Juliana will show you that when we pull it up. But the biggest work during this phase was the emphasis on refining and finalizing tribe connections, specifically connecting the signatory tribes with their modern day equivalents. So I'll use my own tribe's treaty as an example. On the National Archives scan of the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, the treaty is called the Treaty between the United States and the Sioux Nation. Sioux is actually a misnomer for the Oceti-Sakowin, which is made up of the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people, which have additional subgroups within them. On the Kapler's document scan, it's called Treaty with the Sioux, the Brule, Oglala, Minnekoju, Hunktoni, Hunkpapa, Yanktoni, Blackfeet, Cuthead, Two Kettle, Sanzark, and Santee Arapaho. So many of those names I just listed are the traditional names of the bands of the Sioux Nation. So in some cases, these original traditional names are not what the tribe is called today when looking at the list of the federally recognized tribes. So we had our scholar in residence research and align the signatory tribes with their modern day connection and what is currently labeled on the database as the successor and interest tribes. So for example, the Minnekoju, the Blackfeet, and the Two Kettle bands I listed earlier actually make up what is the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe of the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation. And you'll see those connections on the database in that both of them are listed within a specific treaty. And then phase 3 included the identification and inclusion of additional resources. So Juliana will get into the research done under this phase next, but it's important to know that under this phase, we contracted again with the same scholar in residence to do research beyond Kapler's Volume 2 and add additional treaties and agreements. This was in direct response to some feedback we received in our tribal listening session at the end of 2021 to go beyond the sources found within Kapler's. And so this brings us to phase 4, which is our current phase, where we are focusing on continued indexing, uploading and publishing the new treaties outside of Kapler's, and lastly, a follow-up tribal consultation listening session, hopefully in this coming summer. So with that, I will hand it over to Juliana.
So I want to talk a little bit about some recent improvements in addition to what Taylor has mentioned. In addition to building out the site and ingesting 375 initial treaties and agreements in phase one, we continue this work in identifying connections, indexing, and refining the work that's been uploaded to date. We also continue to research and identify successor and interest tribes, which we define as treaties applicable to current federally recognized tribes, which we'll show you more when we get to the demonstration portion. And as an aside, while every attempt has been made to provide accuracy, this research is not intended to represent definitive successors for any indigenous nation. Rather, it should be used as a starting point for research. Moreover, we began expanding our efforts outside of CAPLERS, and we are ingesting over 300 treaties and agreements for inclusion into the database from a variety of sources, including American State Papers, Annual Report of the Commissioner of Indian Affairs to the Secretary of Interior, Annual Report of the Secretary of War, 1877, Documents of American Indian Diplomacy, Treaties, Agreements, and Conventions, 1775 through 1979. Documents relative to the colonial history and state of New York, National Archives, Records Group 75, Office of Indian Affairs, and U.S. congressional publications. We've also revamped the look and feel of the database and continue to streamline its functionality. At this time, I'm going to transition into the database for a live demonstration. You too can view the site by visiting treaties.okstate.edu. So we're in the database right now. And when we designed the site, our partners asked for some key features for users across a variety of skill levels. They asked that the site be easy to search, easy to navigate, easy to copy and paste text, and have the ability to highlight terms when searching. So we've tried to keep all of these things in mind when designing the site. So at the very top of the page where you see Tribal Treaties Database Public Beta, you can be anywhere within the database. And if you click it, it takes you back to the main homepage. On the right, you have a variety of options, including Browse By, Frequently Asked Questions, About the Site, Contact Information, and our disclaimer. In the sky background, you'll notice our main search bar. Moving down the page, you have different browse by options, by treaty, agreement, tribes, key provisions, and indexes. And these indexes focus primarily on CAPLERS. You have the original index, which was created in 1904, and a new comprehensive index, which was created in 2022. Moving down, you'll notice partner logos, a contact form, and of course, our basic footer information. So let's go ahead and do a search. So I'm going to search for farming and see what happens. And so you'll see a variety of treaties populate on the page for the search. So let's click into Treaty with the Crows 1868. If I scroll down the page, now remember we did a search for farming, you will see farming highlighted within the text. So normally when you have a page with a lot of text, um, it's really hard to see where those words appear. I could do a Control F and search farming, and they'll appear. But it's really nice to have that highlighted functionality on the page itself. Now, I also want to give you the lay of the land when it comes to navigating the site and these different pages. At the top, you have links to either a document scan or an alternative source. In this place, these are our source files. So I know this first document scan is going to take us into CAPLERS itself. And I know that this alternative source is taking us to the National Archives. So if I click into the document scan, this treaty will come up within CAPLERS, and then I can explore it further within volume 2. If I go back to the treaty and I click on alternative source, I'm directed to the National Archives. And now I can look at the text within National Archives website, and I could interact with these documents as well. And so this is a nice feature for our users, and we're also able to connect users to additional archival resources. If we go back to the site, you'll see the original signatories have been identified, the successor and interest tribes, key provisions, and identifiers. With the identifiers, you'll see an RIT number in some cases. RIT stands for Ratified Indian Treaties, and these RIT numbers are used a lot with Library of Congress sources and also with the National Archives. NAI numbers, those are the National Archives unique identifiers. So if you're doing research and you're coming across Library of Congress or National Archive sources, you now have the identifiers to connect with this information. As you scroll down the page, you may notice information. It's in a brownish color font on the on the right hand side. And these are margin notes that may appear in the source material. In this case, these are margin notes that appear in Kapler's Volume 2. If I scroll up and I go home, I could, instead of searching within the search box, I could browse by treaties. And when I hit browse by, I actually have a couple of different options when we think about the filters. I could use this filter to really drill down further by year, treaty, signatories, successors, types, and tag. And by type, we're talking about a treaty, an agreement, or other. With tags, it's a mix of ratified and unratified, but also some of these key provisions. For example, crimes against Indian country, ferries, mining and mineral rights, and ratified. So you have all kinds of options when you're searching. So when you're searching treaties, I like sorting it by year. I think that gives you a lot of different options, especially in this area. If I go home, same thing with agreements. It's the same concept. And if I click into one, I could see that here the information is a little minimal. So this is a treaty that has not been ratified. We know the original signatory. We've identified the successor. And when we go to the document scan, it's appearing in Kapler's Volume 2. But as we continue to add treaties, we're also noticing treaties appearing in some of the other volumes of Kapler's. Of course, Kapler's is 7 volumes of great information. With tribes, you have original signatories broken down in alphabetical order. So I could search for the Fond du Lac. So with the Hoopa, I could click on the treaties that have been tagged as original signatories. Where you do not see a tag in there, that means we are continuing to add information. We've loaded all of the original signatories in the database, and then these areas will populate as the information continues to flesh out. Another thing I wanted to bring up, you could also search by successor and interests. So I could search by the Crow tribe of Montana, and then I will see where we believe the Crow tribe is a successor today for these treaties. One of the most exciting areas are keywords and provisions. So if we click on hunting, fishing, and gathering, we will see all of the treaties that may fit into this category. So if I click on Treaty with the Sioux, 1805, and this is what's great, is it will highlight the area of the treaty where this is applicable. Let's try another one. That was hunting, fishing, gathering. Let's go to canals. So let's look at the treaty with the Miami. And again, it jumps right down to the text where it is applicable. So it's a really great feature. And if we go back to that page, you'll notice we're seeing a lot of treaties with provide agricultural assistance, provide educational assistance, right-of-ways, roads and highways, hunting and fishing, and then it continues as well. And all of this is still in development, and we continue to add provisions to the database. And I spoke a little bit already about the comprehensive index and the original index. Just know when you're looking at these pages, it's really hard to translate a physical text to the digital world. And so what you see here are actually the physical page numbers coming out of Kapler's. And this is one part of the site where we do not have that highlighting present, but it does take you to where the treaty appears within Kapler's physical volume. So I'm going to jump back into our slides and talk about corrections. So as you can imagine, this work is, it's tricky. And we're consulting a lot of different resources throughout history. So this is a work in progress, and it's also something that's prone to error. So I want to stress that, again, this site is a starting point for research, and we welcome questions and reports of corrections. Our partners with the USDA, who are scheduling nation-to-nation listening sessions later in 2024, are also working on a communication plan for tribal governments to submit questions to us formally so we could provide that added context and information directly on the website.
Thank you, Juliana. I appreciate the walkthrough on that. I always love watching the the demonstration because I feel like even though I've been working on this, I always learn something new in going through the database. So throughout the development of this database, feedback has been collected from tribes, tribal representatives, federal workers, lawyers, and others on how they've been utilizing the database. When the database was published, we initiated a federal beta test team. It was made up around 20 federal workers from about 7 different departments and agencies, and they provided the database team with feedback in November and December of 2021 on the workability, the searchability, and the ability to maneuver throughout the database. During this time, we also held a listening session with tribal leaders, tribal attorneys, and experts. We encouraged tribal leaders, tribal attorneys, and experts to provide comments and share their opinion about the database. We did hear some comments regarding expanding to treaties beyond those included in Kapler's, such as pre-colonial treaties, international treaties, unratified treaties, and as Juliana noted earlier, some of this has been done and the has been included and has been published on the database. But this work is still ongoing as more sources become accessible online. We also heard commentary on providing the historical maps that went along with the treaties, having a place within the database for tribes to comment or make suggested edits. This is something we are hoping to address in the next few phases, along with a definition section of terminology that is used throughout the database. And we have also been thinking about other potential enhancements to the database, including interoperable data, working to connect to other resources that might be out there that add to the database, like we have done with the National Archives scan and the Kapler scan, or expansion to include executive orders or inter-tribal agreements. Some of these are more doable than others, but the intent of this database is twofold. One, to be an accurate and comprehensive database with as much access to these types of historical documents as possible. And two, as much as feasible, be responsive to the needs of those utilizing the database. So in all, what we want folks to understand is that this is a working database. We've kept it in its beta version for the last few years because we are constantly adding, editing, and adjusting the information on the website. And more importantly, it is simply an educational resource. It is not the end-all be-all for the treaties or treaty rights or tribal connections. So we encourage those using the database to see it as a starting point for their research and their learning. And with that, I think we can open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Juliana and Taylor. As Taylor said, if anyone has questions, you can come forward off of mute and ask your questions. If you're shy, please chop something out in the chat for us. James asks, will there be a GIS function associated with the database?
Thank you for the question, James. This is usually always the first question we get when we, or one of the first questions we get when we do these presentations. So it's something that we are thinking about. It is a very hard component to add. I'm assuming this is in regard to like a GIS mapping component of the treaty boundaries or the boundaries covered within these agreements. We do know of other sources that have started doing this work or thinking about doing this work. So this plays into that interoperational function that I was talking about. If there is a database, especially if it's already, if it's government supported, that is already out there or in the process, we want to make sure that we are using those resources. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Finding a way maybe for this database to talk to other databases in that sense. So it's something that is on our radar. I don't know necessarily if it's something that we would take on because it is a specialized kind of area of work. But we have been thinking about it, and it is a comment that we've heard quite frequently.
So there's a couple questions that kind of have the same, that are asking about the same thing. Is there a way to search for treaters by geographical area or state?
So that's a great question, and I would have a question back for you. So we've talked about, and earlier versions of the database did include searching by state, but the challenge is, do you search by where the treaty was signed, or do you search where the treaty is applicable now? So for me, it's what is more important for users of the database. And so I'm asking you if you could put in chat what would be helpful, because this is one of those tricky pieces of information. Again, I'm not sure if where it was signed is more helpful than other places.
Both of those people who asked that question responded where it is applicable. I'm so sorry, for today.
Okay, this is good information for us to have. Thank you.
Sorry, I had another question and it jumped. So Chris said there are some missing tribes in the tribal list. Can I suggest adding them?
So, and Taylor, please jump in here too. We are using federally recognized tribes, and so there may be some missing in the list, but if you're noticing anything out of the ordinary, we're happy for you to shoot us an email or pass that along.
Aaron asks, did your team have any connection to or a conversation with the NATHPO Land Database Initiative /beta? Did I say that right? NATHPO LAND database.
I'm assuming the NAPO stands for the Native American Tribal Historic Preservation Office land database. I don't believe so. We did talk with other departments when we were working on the connection to the modern day tribes, because there are other resources and data sets out there. I believe there's, a few with, there's one with NAGPRA, there's a few other more historical ones. And so we did, try to, again, not reinvent the wheel, but as we were going through the work, we, especially with those connections for signatory to modern day tribes, we thought it was best if we kind of just started anew and then built upon that. But with the actual land database, I don't believe so, but it's definitely something we can look into and see how it might, work with our with this database.
Matt asks, what has there been a role for the DoD Office of General Counsel in preparing or reviewing this database?
Thank you for that question. So within the Tribal Treaty Rights Interagency Working Group that's run out of the White House Council on Native American Affairs, and within the Tribal Treaty Rights MOU, there is the creation of the legal subgroup. So this information this database has been sent to the legal subgroup, so they are aware of it. I don't know specifically who is on that legal subgroup. DoD might have, from the OGC office might have someone on there, but I'm not quite sure. So the legal subgroup we have contacted them and reached out to them on this database. But other than that, I'm not quite sure for the DoD OGC's office besides that legal subgroup.
Daniel says, can you include this in your database, the Tribal Treaties Database, in this database group links to other available databases such as TDAT and at HUD.gov? Daniel, if I did not say your question correctly, you can come off of mute and ask it.
So I think in general, we are always trying to look for new sources and new information to include on the database, to connect with the database, to speak and work with the OSU database. I am not familiar with the TDAT or the HUD.gov databases. It's definitely something that we can look into and see if it would be beneficial or helpful in adding or linking to the database on the OSU side. I do believe, Juliana, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a page on the database that has other sources that could possibly be beneficial to have those as well, depending on what are on those databases.
So you said that you had a lot more to do. About approximately how many more treaties do you think you have to add to the database at this point?
So right now I have about 100 treaties I'm in the process of working through and uploading online that have been identified by our researcher. And then our researcher is going to focus on other treaties and agreements that we know are limited within the database, probably starting with Hawaii. But again, if there are gaps, if you're noticing gaps, we'd love to hear from you and also consider your needs as we continue to build out the database.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that what we put on the database, again, Juliana, correct me if I'm wrong, is that, we try to find available public resources to connect to. And so sometimes, if there's something we want to put on the database, it might just not be available yet within a public resource. So one of the things that we do want to do and that we've heard from is, executive orders. And they're in the process of scanning executive orders onto I think it's the National Archives, but it might be something else, website. And so we're just waiting for those public resources, those digital resources to become available. And so that, is kind of common for the other sources that we want to add to the database.
Again, if anybody wants to come off a chat and ask your questions, you're more than welcome to. I will just put this out for anybody who cannot see the chat. Liz Galley-Noble of the Legacy Program said, just an FYI, the DoD Native American Affairs Program has been involved in the development and review of this database. And Alyssa has a comment also of historian Claudio Straut's Invasion of America and ArcGIS project that may be of interest to those on the call. The data set combines from the BAE in 1899, and she lists the website. And I will, if anybody would like me to send this out, some of these links out, please let me know, and I will be happy to do that after we end our meeting here today.
So let me, if I could ask a question of the audience, if there is a provision or a keyword that would help you in your work, what would those be? So we could be on the lookout as we continue to refine the information in the database.
And just to add, school.
Oh, school.
And just to add on to that, we are always taking feedback as people, start to maneuver and work their way through the database. So I will put my email in the chat. So if you guys have any comments or anything, any questions, you can definitely reach out. And this is a collaborative effort, and it is a beta version, so we're continuing to work on it. So we would love to hear your feedback or any commentary you have as you get to work around a little bit more in the database.
Yep, 2 more words came in: fish and access. Katie, excuse me, asked, will the database include more recent agreements with co-stewardship and co-management agreements becoming more widespread? I was curious if there is a potential to include components that touches on or overlaps this.
So that's a good question. So part of my other work that I do with USDA is I also help with the co-stewardship, the Joint Secretarial Order 3403 that helps, work on co-stewardship with tribes as it relates to mostly Forest Service, which is under the Department of Agriculture. So I do know of actually a resource online. It's not a government database, but it's a new one that I believe was published within the last, I want to say month. And it's trying to do just that, put those type of co-stewardship agreements online. So maybe in the future, as that database gets more information, again, we can find a way to make that resource work with this resource. I don't know right now if we're planning on putting any of the co-stewardship agreements within this database, just because of the charge within the Treaty Rights MOU 2021 MOU, which is basically specific to the treaties. But that doesn't mean we can't, think about expanding it beyond on the treaties and agreements. So definitely something to think about. Definitely a good suggestion, and something we will continue to think about as more of these resources become available.
Yeah, it looks like you two are getting a lot of feedback. So categories of rights, resources themselves, exercise of a right, property rights, use and access rights, I think, which was touched upon. Agreement with other commenters, interesting project, and it will be very useful. Yes, I think we all agree this tool will be very useful in the future. Have you encountered concerns with sensitive information? Example, avoiding the post of a map that has highlighted specific locations where artifacts may have been found in the past. How are these issues dealt with? Asks Mike.
I think that's a really good point, and kind of another one of the reasons that we've stayed away from the mapping component. There's just so many different nuances about mapping, and it's not not just the boundaries, but a lot of that is maps involve sacred sites, traditional sites, and so that is kind of why also, the amount of work that would take to create a mapping component. I don't think we said it, but the team is pretty small for the treaty database team. And so right now we might not have the capacity. And so that's kind of why we're thinking about how it can connect to resources that are already out there, already being developed, already taking into consideration these specific type of this work and being thoughtful about it. So it's a good point, but just because we don't have a mapping component, it's something we'll think about as we potentially work with other data sets who are doing that work. And I do see another question, or it's not a question, but it is a comment, to have a related case law to the treaties. This is something that has been brought up and we have thought about, but it, again, kind of with the mapping and GIS component, it would take a completely different set of expertise, maybe mostly legal expertise, to go through all of the different historical case law that apply to these treaties. There are some that are more well known regarding treaties and treaty rights, but that's a whole other beast to approach in itself, and it would take a different level of expertise. So it is something that's been flagged for us, but that one would take a little bit more thought to put into it and see who would be the appropriate people to be involved in that. So it's not on our horizon right now, I would say, because of that.
Katie Shea just said it would be great for some grad students to study Indigenous people's laws. Wink, wink. Yes, I agree with that. Does anybody else have any questions? Kate Plimpton, do you have any other questions or comments for our presenters?
Or no questions, but we're excited about this. It's an important resource, and we're happy to be supporters of it. I know Liz Galley-Noble, who's the resource or legacy resource lead, is here too, and I'm sure she says the same thing. It's such an important resource, so I'm excited that it's available, and looking forward to seeing where you guys go from here. I'm excited about all the ideas folks have.
Mm-hmm. Miriam asks, are there compacts and other non-treaties but MOU type agreements oh my gosh, it keeps jumping. I'm so sorry. Agreements contemplated to be added?
Not right now. I think it kind of goes to the same comments about the co-stewardship agreement. Some of the co-stewardship work is in the form of an MOU or an MOU type agreement. So it's definitely a good suggestion, something we can think about. But right now, I don't think it's on our list yet.
And Greg asks, is ANSCA, ANSES, sorry if I mispronounced that, included in the database?
It's ANCSA, Jerry.
ANCSA, thank you.
It's a law.
I'm not familiar with. I apologize.
So I think that's in reference to the Alaska Native Settlements Claim
yes.
Act. So because that's a statute, right now it's not included in the database. Alaska is a little bit different. And this is something we do acknowledge that, not all tribes have treaties. So this is a very specific database right now for treaties and agreements. It's definitely something we can think about, especially as there are those statutes and statutes and bills and, again, executive orders that do influence or have a really big are important historically to tribes. So it's definitely something we can consider and see where it might fit on the database. But right now it's not included. But as always, this is a database that we are continuously adding to. So that's a really good suggestion, and I will make sure to add it to our list of things to talk about as we follow up with our database team.
Yes, it sounds like you and your team have a lot of work ahead of you with this. Is there oh, sorry, Taylor, that is a question you posed to the group. I will ask it to anybody who wants to come off of mute. Is there a way to save the chat to respond to suggestions? I believe so, Taylor. Also, if anybody does have any additional questions or comments, Taylor and Juliana's email are also in the chat someplace. And if anybody needs it again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me to be able to get it. Tribal resolutions would be great to include. Sounds like you have quite a bit of additional things to add.
Yeah. And so I do know when it comes to tribal resolutions and tribal codes, some of them are posted online, some of them aren't, depending on what the tribe posts. I do think there actually is a resource online regarding tribal resolutions that for the ones that are available. So that might be a good suggestion, again, to kind of connect to our database as it relates and as it is feasible on the database. So appreciate that comment.
In respect to work, have you and Juliana been working with the tribes on some of these treaties? Because some of these might, documents do go missing somehow. So, have you been working with some of the tribes to ask if they have copies of these missing documents if the government is unable to find them, or has it just been through publicly available documents?
So I think it's important. It's a tough question. I think it's important to work with the tribes first to make sure that successor and interest research is as correct as we could get it. And I think we're still trying to reach out and get good responses and feedback from the tribe so we can make this as accurate as we can. In terms of the source material, this is tricky, right? Because this information can be in a variety of different resources. And so ideally, we would want to see it in a public place. And for the majority of content, it's somewhere in a public resource. So that's the big thing we're focusing on right now. And then I could see in future phases if we need to work with the tribes to identify where some of the source material may be. That's important. But even the copies or the scanning or what's housed at the National Archives versus someplace else may also be in question. So there's a lot there we have to work through in terms of the historical source material.
Thank you for addressing my question. I think it's something that working doing cultural resources, that we have to be careful with the resources, the paper resources sometimes, but also we know that there's always going to be knowledge gaps until we find that document that's been missing. So thank you for that. I will wait for another minute to ask if anybody has any additional questions. If not, we'll just let you, Taylor and Juliana, go for the rest of the day, so they can get back to their busy schedules and getting this database working for all of us. Well, I will let, I guess, Taylor or Juliana, do you have any closing remarks regarding your Tribals Treaty Database?
I just want to say thank you guys so much for allowing us to come here and present all the work that OSU has really put in the last year on this database. It is such an amazing resource. We can't wait to add more. We are very excited to talk more with tribal leaders and experts on enhancing the database over this next year, and be on the lookout for new additions. So thank you so much.
Thank you as well. And of course, we appreciate everyone's support in this effort.
And we would like to thank you today for joining us for this presentation. It's really fantastic and very important work. So thank you for presenting on this topic and letting everybody know about the great work that you two and OSU have been doing on this. And we look forward to seeing what else comes of this in the future. So thank you everyone for joining today, and I will let you get on with your busy days. Have a great afternoon.
Everybody.